My first question to you is, how did you meet Guruji, and what were the circumstances that led to this event into your life?
So I was with Paramahamsa Nityananda, who's Shaivite, and he came to Vancouver in 2009, and a bunch of us drove through the mountains to go meet him. And that's what triggered me going to India in 2010 to meet him. And that's when I realized that Hinduism was really my path, that I was going to throw myself full into it. And I had no knowledge of Guruji, Paramahamsa Vishwananda. There was no information about him here. He had never come. And I didn't know Hinduism had different lineages, that, you know, Shaivite, Vaishnava, that there was a difference. I thought Hindu was Hindu. And so I just threw myself into the teachings and studies. And when I finally decided, after my son moved out and I'd completed all my obligations as a householder, which is what they talk about in this path, that then you pursue your spiritual life. And so I moved to India to become a sannyas, and I was at the Kumbh Mela with the Shaivite group in 2015. And apparently the Shaivites and Vaishnavas historically have fought so violently at Kumbh Melas that they've killed each other. Oh. And I found that very strange. And so they're in separate locations. So Paramahamsa Vishwananda's camp was at a different location on the river than where our camp was. But in an effort to bring the two groups together, since these two gurus are friends, Nityananda invited Guruji to our camp at the Nasik Kumbh Mela. And so that was the first time I physically saw him. And I was just getting beat up left and right. My ego was just being demolished by this Shaivite tradition. There was no holds barred. It was just humiliating, embarrassing things happening all the time. And I remember sitting on the floor in our tent, and Guruji walked in with these tall, elegant beings, right, who I now know are Swami Aniruddha and Swami Revatikanta, and I'm with all these tiny little Tamil angry women. and I said, "Who's that?" Like, when I saw him, it was like watching the sun come in, and nobody knew who he was. They said, "Oh, he's someone in Germany." Or not even Germany. They said, "We think he's a European guru." Mm-hmm. But I was just thunderstruck by him. And then meanwhile, my path was still roaring along. And I was initiated as a sannyas. And I never saw Guruji again. And I carried on in India. And after a year and a half in the main ashram, all of a sudden I was abruptly thrown out. They started sending me to remote locations alone. And sometimes I starved, sometimes there were other people there, but it really just sort of destroyed everything I had been. And even though at the time it was horrific, I now realize what a blessing it was, because it tore apart the identity. It tore apart the personality, everything I had been. And that's when gurus can work with you, is when you're down to nothing, when there's no preconceived notion of who you are. And so I was sort of surviving and struggling and questioning what was happening. And then I was abruptly deported from India with no explanation. And so I came back to Canada in the middle of a blizzard, and I'm in my flip-flops and my sari because I hadn't planned on returning to Canada. And it was interesting because when I was sitting at the airport in Mumbai, ready to fly to Canada, my phone lit up with a message from an old friend here. And she said, "I'm thinking about you, what's going on?" And I said, "I'm being deported." And her husband said he heard Babaji yell in his head, you have to help her. And they said, we'll pick you up from the airport, we'll bring clothes, don't worry about anything. And sure enough, they, embraced me, bundled me up, took me home. And so I carried on here in Calgary, Alberta, for about 6 months. And then again, my phone lit up with a message from a friend, and he's a devotee of Guruji's in California, in the US. But we had met in India and stayed friends on Facebook. And he said, I heard your guru doesn't want you anymore. But he said, mine's coming and he's flying to Canada. He said, you should come. And I thought, well, I've got nothing else to do. And I was nervous because I don't know the rules. I didn't know if you were allowed to switch gurus or visit another guru, and I think a lot of us Westerners don't know the rules of Hinduism, right? We've grown up Christian, we don't know who gets mad about what. But I'd been messaging India, no one would respond to me. No one had anything to do with me. And there was no explanation. It was just, I was frozen out. So I flew to Vancouver and I coordinated so I would land at the airport the same time as the Americans and Guruji. And same thing, when he walked out of, the airport, it was like seeing the sun again. I couldn't believe it. And my friend dragged me over and introduced me. And Guruji just started asking me questions that were so specific. It was obvious he had been watching this whole drama. Wow. He knew everything that had been going on. And then he said hello to the rest of the group, who were all from America. So then he said, isn't anyone here from Canada? And I said, I am. And he went, where? And I said, Calgary. And it turns out he had been saying for a year, there's somebody in Calgary we have to go get. And when he started saying that, I wasn't in Calgary, I was lost in India. So I had to get deported and sent back so he could come fetch me. So it was just the whole weekend, the energy was so intense, it was just roaring. I couldn't sleep. I knew it felt like he was scanning me to see if I was well done. We talked about how gurus are like cooks and they throw the ingredients together and put you on the stove. And when you're well done, they can work with you. And it was like, what happened in India was so extreme and intense, but I think it moved me very quickly through the steps. And when I see the work he's doing on some of the young brahmacharis at the ashram, he's very sweet and very gentle. He can be tough, but he never does the things that happened to me in India. He never does such extreme, get the lesson or you will die. That just doesn't happen. And I realized that I had made, be very careful what you pray for, because when I was in a very safe meditation group and we were having chai tea after, and I said, I just want it all to happen quickly. I want to move through these lessons as fast as possible. And that's what I got, right? I just got the most intense hammering. And they've told me since that he's never done that to a Westerner and never to a Western woman. He's never sent them alone out into India. This is the other guru. He's never done the things that happened to me. Wow. But I had asked for it. And I think deep down I knew that. Even when people were saying, why didn't you run? I think there was something inside. And what I think it was maybe a past life where I did run. I just had this sense that this was my last chance, that I had screwed up opportunities before, and that whatever was being thrown at me, I had to go through. And so I had this amazing weekend with Guruji in Vancouver. And then he just, I said, what do I do? Like, I feel like I'm supposed to be with you. Do I have to contact Nityananda? Because I just felt sick about trying to contact that group. And he said, no, I contact him. And I realized all he does is shut his eyes and they're in touch, right? These avatars are at a whole other communication level than we can understand. And immediately after that, things just lined up. I became an Om chanting coordinator. An AKY teacher was flying in to Calgary to teach one student. So Guruji said, go, learn AKY. And then I was invited to Navaratri. So June, I met him. And October, I flew to the ashram for the first time for Navaratri. And I remember him pulling up on his little golf cart when I first got there. And I was just standing at the back because I was so shocked that I was even being allowed to be there, right? I've been sleeping on the dirt with street dogs and starving in India. And to be at that ashram, I was in shock. And he waved me over and I said, thank you for letting me come to your home. And he said, it's our home. And I just about started to cry because I thought, you better not be messing with me. Because, I was like a broken street dog by the time I got there. And I thought, I don't think I could take one more blow. Like, please don't be making fun of me. And 3 days later, he made me a Swami. Wow. So, yeah, it was, people were confused, but I said to them later, it's been 30 years, right? It was turmoil in California where I was guided to Yogananda's Kriya Yoga. So these avatars have us in their embrace our whole lives. And that's what it took me a long time to realize how safe I was, even though physically it looked like I wasn't. And that's the biggest context shift that I can recommend to anybody, is to realize that consciousness is always inside of you, watching every move. And if you start talking to it and having an ongoing conversation, then it starts answering. All he's waiting for is to know you're listening. And as soon as they know you're listening, they can just handle everything for you. And, every time I lay down, I'm house sitting a place right now. And every time I lie down in that bed at night, I say, thank you. And I hear this little whisper, you're welcome. Because, so, this is the conversation you want in your life. And then everything else just becomes funny. And it was interesting because the lineage he put me in, my family, have all had wild, wild lives. And I realized it was to prepare me to realize that you are stronger than anything that's thrown at you. Like my grandmother was a nursing student here in Canada. And one night, a guy attacked her, slit her face open with a scalpel, slit her neck, wow, shot her several times. And then he slit his neck and he dropped dead. The wimp dropped dead. And she held her neck together and walked back to the hospital. Wow. And it was this huge scandal. And it was the front page of the newspaper because this was the turn of the century. And the nurses there said, we have a hospital up in the Yukon where the gold rush is. They said, we can't get anyone to go because it's so wild. But everyone there is scarred because it was such a hard life. And so she, at 20, she went far, far north to Dawson City to the gold rush. And her first patient was my grandfather, who just had his hand pulled off in a mining accident. And they met and fell in love. So, and it was such a blessing because she lived with us when I was a little kid. Yeah. And it wasn't until I got older that I heard her story, because all I knew, she was the softest, funniest, gentlest person I'd ever met. And my brother and I would go into her bedroom and tear it apart. We'd turn it into forts and raceways, and she would sit there and laugh. And now I'm finally at that state that she was at, right? If you just keep going through these events that get thrown at you and understand the lesson, understand that God's guiding you, it all becomes very funny. It just, I had someone tried to threaten me, sort of, oh, if you don't do this, something bad's going to happen. And I just looked at them like, you've got nothing. Right? People have tried to kill me. You've got nothing. So, and I don't recommend anyone follow that path. You've got the grace of having Guruji's teachings in front of you now. And by listening to what he says and doing it, you can avoid a lot of this other stuff that I went through. And I think I had serious karma. I think I had been a violent person in a past life. I think I'd been a horrible man in a past life. And I think that's why so many of these events were delivered to me. And, we talked about the talk I gave on forgiveness. It's on YouTube. And when I finally realized that these things were happening to me because I had to pay off that debt, it became so much easier to forgive the person who had wronged me, because I realized it's just a lesson. It's just payback. And when we stop whining about, why do I have a bad boss? Why isn't my husband treating me better? All of these things, you have to stop complaining and understand, I deserve this. It's been given to me for a reason. And I'm sorry if I've ever done this to somebody. And as soon as you get that context going in your head, those situations end so fast. Like now when something comes to me, it's usually over in a half an hour. If there's a altercation with somebody or somebody gets mad and it brings up emotion in me, I immediately go to that spot. Are they being like this? I go, what have I done that's triggered this? And a lot of times that voice that I'm having conversations with will say, this person is very hurt. Don't react. So sometimes it's karma why people are reacting, but sometimes you're in front of someone who is basically a frightened, hurt child. And when you show them kindness, you can diffuse the situation immediately. And that's what I've found about this path is devotion is really the go-to answer to anything that happens. Because I went through years of trying to organize a career and organize my life and plan things. And it was ridiculous because, I didn't know where I was supposed to be heading. And when things were sabotaged, I was just in such confusion because I didn't have the context right, that God isn't a hobby, right? That being connected to the divine shouldn't be something you do as a tourist on your days off. It's a constant connection. And as soon as I let that be the connection, everything happened. Like my favorite example of that happened, I was in California, so I was following Yogananda's teachings. Guruji was still a kid, so he wasn't available yet. And after I talked about in the forgiveness talk, my husband had tried to kill me and our baby. He had a brain tumor and he just snapped one night. And I ended up becoming homeless with a baby. So it was just years of chaos and trying to get our life together. And I worked in the greenhouses making topiaries, making animals out of ivy and moss. And, my background was I was a writer. And finally, one night I just said a prayer and I yelled at God. I thought I needed to be stern for a change. And I said, I'm a writer, damn it. Like, you're giving me all these laborer jobs. I'm a writer. And sometimes you have to set the intention in your life. And that's what Guruji watches for too. He watches for you to set an intention, because then he can jump in and help. And as long as you're confused, he can't help you. So I finally just said, I'm done with living like this. I'm a writer. And so a couple of days later, I was offered a job as a cleaning lady. And I thought, well, writer, cleaning lady. But we needed money. So I grabbed my kid. He was 5 then. And we were driven over to this old man's house. And he was a recluse and almost a hoarder. Like the house had stacks of newspapers and dusty things. But he was an old war veteran. And so I was just very respectful. I set my kid up at the kitchen table coloring, and I just cleaned. And the man was very grateful that I didn't bother him, that I was just quiet and cleaned. And I was paid cash and I left. And then I was invited back the next week. And this time he sort of came over, and he was from Serbia. He'd been in World War II. Wow. In Serbia, and he'd been in concentration camps. So he'd had a horrific time during the war. But as soon as he came to America, he won an art competition and became world famous. And so he was a famous artist worldwide and a recluse. And so he came up to me the second time I was cleaning, and he said, I hear you're a writer. And I said, yes. And he said, show me something you've written. So the next week I brought him the script I'd written about my grandparents in the gold rush. And he said, my work is in the Smithsonian Museum, and they've been asking me to publish my biography, but I don't know any writers. He said, how much would you charge to write my biography? So I went from cleaning lady to official biographer, like that. And I couldn't have dreamt that on my own, right? There's no way in the world I could have come up with that. And that was me sitting in Yogananda's temple, just saying, make me a writer. I don't know how it's going to happen, but make me a writer. And he did. So when you put as Guruji says, it's like you're all drunk drivers driving down the highway. And he's like, let me drive. Just sit in the passenger seat and sleep it off and let me drive. And it's true. If you understand that putting the divine in charge, that you will have a grand adventure. It doesn't mean you'll become some robotic clone who has no mind, right? It just means that you understand that the plan is in motion. And if you keep letting the divine guide you, and literally, if you have that conversation going in your head every day, just going, what are we going to do today? Or make it playful and light. It doesn't have to be a formal prayer. And literally, you'll just get these little things drop in your head, like go right. And you go right and run into this amazing person. Or, why don't you do this today? Like these ideas will start dropping in very slowly. And the way I've learned to tell the difference between a chattering mind and a divine inspiration is, if I hear an idea and I get exhilarated, then that's a yes. That means I'm following the Atma. If an idea makes me feel depressed and sad, like, why don't you go get a job? Then that's a no. And I've seen so many people, especially here in Calgary, it's an oil capital. And so many people I know have taken jobs because the pay is good. And they hate their work. They go to work miserable. They spend their day miserable. It's not worth it. And you talked about reading my memoir, and feel free to share it with this group. I wrote a biography called Inside the Wall: From Hollywood to Homeless to Higher Consciousness. It covers 25 years, and I thought it was a stupid idea to write because I thought it was so self-centered. And then people told me, no, you can help like the homeless kids, the women in shelters, when they see that there's a path through these intense events, So I wrote it, but I wrote it for people suffering post-traumatic stress. So it's very light. A lot of people read it in a night because I didn't want to dwell on the dark episodes, because I remember when I was going through them, how hard it was. And a lot of people who've read that memoir have dealt with that kind of trauma. So I wanted it to go through very quickly and then show the solution, show the cognition that changed, and make it funny again. So there's a lot of humor in it, because I felt God laughing at me. Like it was like something would happen and I would explode, and I could feel the gods up there or wherever laughing and going, push that button again. She's hilarious when you do that to her. So
But overall, it's
yeah.
also a very practical book, because then you can make a lot of analogies with sometimes what's going into your daily life. I mean, people can do that, and then they can put into practice a lot of the experiences and the wisdom that you got afterwards.
And that's what Guruji's stressing too. He said experiential knowledge is very important, because it's like it embeds itself in your biomemory if it's experiential. Whereas when you're just reading it and it just is sitting in your mind, sometimes you don't understand how to act on it. And I sort of slid into Hinduism or Sanatana Dharma, because when I was younger, just about every solution that I came up with for different events in life were always Sanatana Dharma. I was in a car accident and stopped walking when I was 21. And doctors were not giving me any hope. And yoga got me walking again. But my back kept going out whenever I was stressed. I'd be in bed with a bad back again. Again, doctors had no solution, so I learned to meditate. And then I learned Kriya Yoga. And so these tools are such practical tools. And that's why Sanatana Dharma is not called a religion, it's called the eternal path. It's how to live. And, you know, all the scriptures are, this is how you deal with this. That, you know, the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna had to fight a war. So he was instructed, this is how you know, get over your fear, you get over your insecurity, because we're always given the lessons that we asked for in this life. We're never given anything we didn't ask for. And it's hard to imagine, but I don't know. I did a post recently and it was an update on this amazing woman I met from Slovenia. She came to the ashram this summer when I managed to get over there. And her name's Sasha. Her spiritual name's quite long. I haven't learned it yet, but her son is so handicapped. He doesn't speak. He walks, but very awkwardly. And when I met him, you almost can't tell if he's aware that you're there. So he's really, I don't know even what the diagnosis is, but he was having up to 30 seizures a day. Wow. So she had to quit her job, moved in with her mom, and when she tried putting him in a bed, he would have seizures and flip onto the floor and break bones. So for 16 years, she's been sleeping on the floor with him, so that when the seizures start in the middle of the night, he vomits and then starts to choke on it. Like she's on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, like her whole life for 16 years. And she learned Kriya Yoga a year ago. And then she just got it in her head that she had to get to the ashram. So even though Europe was sort of closing down, opening up, she jumped in a car and drove to the ashram, and I met her. So we went for a walk, and I started to notice this kid and his name's Giridhari. And I started to notice that he was paying attention. And I spun on him and I went, I caught you. I said, you know what's going on. And he burst out laughing. And I thought, who is in here? Like there is somebody, and his energy's massive. So that night, Guruji called an impromptu little talk in the Babaji garden. And so we all got there, and I was just thinking, oh, I hope he talks to her. I hope he lets her approach. And as soon as his talk was over, he waved them over, and he handed her a package of vibhuti, and she said, put it on his mouth every day. And because he wasn't talking, and he drools constantly. He has to have scarves around him all the time. And she has to feed him like a baby. He's in a diaper, like it's extreme. And Guruji talked to them, and he said to her, you are very blessed. You are being allowed to serve Narayana directly. And I just thought, holy smokes, like what is going on here? And she was at the temple for all the prayers, and he settles down completely when kirtan starts being sung. And he rocks and he claps and he just goes into bliss when the music starts. And he behaves, he just sits. So then she came running to me and she said, can you make me a devotee? And I said, well, they're not allowing initiations, and you haven't really joined the organization, or, I don't want to put stress on you, if you don't know what that commitment is. She's like, no. And then Guruji walked up, said, you can be initiated. So I got a hold of Swami Keshava, and so we did the initiation in the round meditation garden. And a couple of people from Slovenia came running over when they heard what was happening. And so I said, I'll sit over here with your son so he won't disturb you. So she could just be one-on-one with the Swami. And same thing, he's surfacing every once in a while. And I looked at him and I went, stop playing with us. Like, you know what's happening here. And he burst out laughing, and all the brahmacharis sort of jumped and they went, what's going on? And I said, there's something up with this guy. And she said, he's finally started talking, and all he does is chant Om Namo Narayana. So after 16 years of not being able to speak, he's chanting. Putting the divine first can solve a problem that immense. Like, just imagine what it does in your life. Just always know every day, this is the first step every day, is to say good morning, right? Say good morning. And, I'm not sure if all of you are followers of Guruji's or not, but whatever concept relates for you, say good morning. Because there is a consciousness that created you. So say hello, thank it for giving you another day, right? It's that simple. And as soon as you switch the context from, I have to take care of my material life first, and then I can be spiritual, you flip it. I wouldn't have become a writer if I had kept pounding the pavement and showing my resume, right? And I didn't even know who to show it to. I was in Encinitas in California. I wasn't in a main city. So for me to get a job like I did, it was the highest paying thing I've ever done. And he started having heart attacks. So he asked if we would move in with him. So someone was on the premises with him. So I lived, in his house for a year, and took him on road trips because I wanted to get him with his friends, because then more stories came out and more memories. And so we had all these free vacations. We just traveled everywhere. And then when he saw me trying to get my screenplays made, he's like, what's the matter? Why don't you just make your own film? So I'm like, oh, I don't know anything. I'm just a writer. And he looked at me and he knew my past. He knew I'd been homeless with a baby. He knew I'd been attacked. And he'd been in concentration camps. And it was like us two old warriors looked at each other, and he goes, what's the worst that could happen? Try. And I thought, what is the worst that could happen? I'm not going to die if it doesn't work. And he let me turn his house into a production office, and I made my first film.
Wow.
So, and as soon as Guruji met me, and, this film was made 20 years before I met Guruji. And my last night at the ashram, after he'd initiated me, we were just talking, and he went, you made a film. And I was like, yes, you know, and then it was like, no, you made a film. And he said, what happened? And I said, nothing, nobody cared. And so he got that spacey look you get sometimes. He went, submit it again, it'll sell this time. And I thought, you're the reason nothing would sell, because it would have taken me off the path, right? My path was sannyas. My path was to get to this first. And now he's given me the okay to go back to making films again. And as soon as...
So you're going to start doing that?
Well, as soon as I stayed at the ashram for 7 weeks this summer. And when I got back, I was a little nervous because I had no idea where I was going to stay or what I was going to do. And places just boom, 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 just kept showing up. Absolute strangers, because there's no devotees here. There's 6 in all of Canada, and they live 4,000 kilometers from me. So all my sanghas are virtual. And I contacted a producer I knew in Vancouver, and he said, get out here, you can stay on my boat. So I stayed on this film producer's boat in downtown Vancouver in the harbor and had meetings about my films. Nice. So yeah, everything's starting to roll again, and we'll see what happens, because film production is very strange right now. You know, some places can film and some can't, and I realized that until Guruji said it was time, nothing was going to sell. And I remember when I took sannyas, my son was very upset, because he said, you are so close to making it. Like, you know, huge people are having meetings with you. And I said, it's always going to stop this close. Like, every deal would get this close and explode, just collapse, fall apart. And it became so obvious that something else was stopping it. That, you know, I had a big meeting lined up in Toronto at the film festival with British producers who were flying to Toronto to meet me, and airplanes flew into the Twin Towers. How extreme does it have to get? Yeah, so it becomes very obvious when you pay attention. It's like, yes, no. And it doesn't mean that it's no for that road forever, right? After all this time, now I'm being told to get back into film. And I realized the experiences weren't wasted, because I learned so much about film production. And it doesn't matter that nothing was made. It was such a great adventure that really that's what we're here for. We're here to gain experience. And it became very clear it's about being, not doing. Right? So if you're just keeping yourself busy with no real reason for it, and I used to do that. I kept myself so busy, you know, meeting people and doing all these things. But it's about what are you being? Are you being a divine person? Are you nurturing your Atma above everything? So if you just have a lovely day, you know, sort of just being kind and gentle to people, you're doing more to help the world than going out and being a type A personality and, you know, completing that list of things to do. You know, and being of service.
What would you advise us? What would be your advice for us?
Guruji says this, and Krishna says that it's in a lot of the Vedas, the ancient teachings, and there is something magical about chanting Om Namo Narayana, right? Like, if you do nothing else, if you believe nothing, they call it japa because they say it's actually spinning around in your throat. And the Buddhists, to remind themselves of that, they have those prayer wheels, you know, and you'll see them and they're spinning them. And at their temples, they go and they make the big columns spin, and they have prayers on them, because there's something about having a bija mantra, like this is actually considered the Raja mantra, to have it spinning around in your inner space, because then it aligns you with the fabric of the universe. It aligns you with why you came here and what you're doing here. An article I wrote was just published 2 days ago. I put the link on my Facebook page, but in Hinduism Today magazine, they published a piece I wrote about chanting mantras in prison. And because I was in Calgary and it was very slow getting people interested in the path, right? There's no Sangha here, but there are a lot of good-hearted souls that were doing Om chanting with me, and we meditate online. But I was trying to find something to be my seva, something that would help. So I volunteered at the Young Offender Center. So it's a prison for kids under 18. And I remember when I finally went through the police checks and the background checks, and I did my pitch, to the board, and they looked at me and they went, "Is this how you're going to dress when you come here?" And I said, "Yes, this is a tilak. It represents my faith, and the orange is sannyas." But they were looking at it from a safety point of view. I just had on a plain tunic. I didn't have any necklaces or flowing things, and they just wanted to make sure I couldn't be strangled.
Yeah.
With anything I was wearing. So they were fine. They didn't care how I painted my face. They just wanted to make sure it was going to be safe for me to go in. And so I sent Guruji a message, and I said, "They want me to meet with these kids one-on-one. What do you want me to do?" And he said, "Teach them Om Namo Narayana." He said, "It doesn't matter if they have no faith." So the first girl I met was due in court the next day, and she was an Aboriginal girl. She was 15. And she said, "I'm innocent." She said, "I didn't commit the crime they're accusing me of." And she said, "I am so sick of adults trying to tell me what to do." And, she was in foster care. So she'd been taken from her family when she was very young, or abandoned. And she said, "I refused a lawyer. I want my day in court." So I said, "Then you need to learn this chant." So we were playing that Jenga game where you take the boards out and stack them on top. And I just got her chanting. And we ended up having that tower like a meter tall. And she went, "It never gets this tall." And I said, "Well, you were chanting, weren't you?" And she said, "I want to do this forever." And I said, "That will save you. That will create your life." And they let her away, and the prison called me later and said she defended herself in court and won.
Wow.
So a 15-year-old girl defended herself in court. Wow. And was set free.
Really?
And so for a year and a half before the lockdown, I was going up every week and teaching these kids. Some were street kids, some were, just grew up in crack houses. Like, these were tough situations, and all I did was teach them Om Namo Narayana. So, and they don't believe in anything. They don't know what my lineage was. They didn't know anything. They just learned to chant. So that's a key to me. If people do nothing else in their life, and the amazing thing about chanting it, and I chant it when I'm driving or cooking or anything. And so as soon as I wake up in the morning, it's rolling in my head. And what's happened as a result of all this is the accidents and mistakes have stopped happening, right? I don't make those weird decisions that create a strange set of events. When you've got that Om Namo Narayana rolling around in your head, you're completely aligned with what you're supposed to do today, who you're supposed to talk to, what's supposed to happen. And when you meet people, you say the right thing to them. So if nothing else, I know why Guruji's stressing it to people so much, is it is a magical solution to just about anything that's going to happen to you in life.
Wow. That's really impressive. I wondered, did you get to stay connected to the kids from the prison or
No, and
raised them?
and before this, I wrote life histories for abused kids. That was a writing contract I would write, and same thing. They couldn't know who I was, so it was the best writing I've ever done, and it was anonymous because I would tell them what happened to them, because psychologists have realized that if these kids don't know the trauma that created everything in their life, they become addicts. They get into drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling. Addiction is always a result of deep trauma from childhood. And so I used to write life histories explaining to them the deeper, more profound reason things happen to us, karma, and forgiveness, forgive the people that harmed you. And it just killed me that I couldn't follow what was happening, right? And then I realized that's why the teachings say, don't be attached to the fruit of your actions. You're simply in the right place at the right time to help that soul go the next step, heal, deal with their life, and then get out. Because if you just stay attached to everything, it's like you're dragging all of these souls with you through life, and that doesn't help anyone. And you don't want anyone becoming codependent on you. So I've had kids in prison ask if they, when they say goodbye to me, they're like, well, maybe I'll run into you at the store someday. And I say, well, that would be lovely. And if they do, I can hand them a card then and let them stay in touch. But while they're in prison, you're just there as a tool. And it's interesting because whenever it takes 2 buses and a train to get to that prison, it takes 2 hours. And the energy would just start roaring, and it was Guruji, right? So I would barely be able to get in the door of the prison. I was just shaking, and then it would just go whoosh. So it literally was him just flooding the place every time I walked in the door. And then I felt great. I felt great through the visit, fine going home. But every time leading up to going to the prison, you could feel him just powering up so he could disperse. And that's what, he says he wants us all to be these bright lights that help people. Just our presence in a room. Anyone who's on the path is going to help that area be better, right? So when you just set the intention, I want to help. I just, let me make this situation better. Let me diffuse what's going on. And I've even thought that just riding on the train, I'll just go in and you'll see all these sad, overworked people, and I just send love, right? I just sit there and send love, and you can feel the energy change, right? So when you realize consciously that you are affecting the world just by walking through it, right? All we are is our intention to be, right? Your intention does everything. It sets up your day. If you set the intention, I'm going to have a great day, you'll have a great day. I realized that it happened to make me surrender. And I wrote about the event in my memoir, and I was going to skip it. And then I realized that too many people are avoiding their lessons. And so what happened was I was homeless with my baby after my husband tried to kill us. And I just, I'm thinking, I've got a degree, I've got a resume, like this shouldn't have happened to me. But nothing I did helped. And finally, one night, we were in an abandoned motel room, and the rain was pouring in under the door, and I had my son in this box wrapped in one of those silver emergency blankets. And I just cried and cried and cried. I couldn't believe that this was my life. And then finally, I think it was about 2 a.m, and I said, God, if you still are out there, I give up. I said, I don't know how to make this stop, and I don't know how I got here. And I said, if you fix this, I will do whatever you want for the rest of my life. And it ended. The next morning, a friend came and she knew where we were. She came and got us. She said, this whole town has been waiting for you to ask for help, but you were so proud that you didn't. So they were all watching me just spiral down. And I'd been raised to think you're supposed to be a self-sufficient woman. You're supposed to take care of your own problems. And I never thought of asking for help. And it ended. That was the end of it. And that's when, and so that was 1992. And it was like learning to live again, because I didn't make any decision or any move without asking first, right? Because I begged for help that night and got it. And the next morning, what happened, there was no bolt of lightning. I was waiting for the angels to show up on chariots, and nothing was happening. So I just went, hello, what should I do? And what dropped in was call Jennifer. So I had some change and I went to a payphone and I called my friend Jennifer, and she got there in like -5 minutes. She came so fast, she made time go backwards. And she's the one who said, this whole town's been waiting for you to ask for help. And she swept us up, and we went and stayed with her and her husband and little boy. They were part of our play date group. We had a mom's kids group, and they wouldn't let me pay for anything. I was still making topiaries, so I was being paid cash for each item I finished. So I had money in my pocket and we were safe, but it wasn't enough to put down a damage deposit and first rent on a place of our own. So we were fine. We just didn't have any stuff, but we were safe. We were, you know, sometimes I'd be sitting just moping and the voice would go, well, did you have a good day? And I was like, yeah. Is your kid happy? Yeah. It's like, well, what are you complaining about? So actually that's another point, is to do a gratitude checklist every day. If you remember to say thank you, you know, when you have a great meal, remember to say thank you, because it can be taken away so fast it'll make your head spin. And by just constantly saying thank you, it's almost like these minions have been assigned to us. And if you say thank you for something that hasn't happened yet, like instead of begging for a better job or place to live, if you just say thank you for my new place, thank you for solving that problem, then the minions have to, oh no, she's already thanking us, we better fix it. And so I've learned that you can skip all those steps, right? Praying, begging, waiting, worrying, getting it. You can just go straight to gratitude, and then the universe has to catch up. If you're already saying thank you for, I'm living in a $2 million estate. So when I was flying back from Germany, I was just saying thank you for finding me a great place to live. So yeah, there's no explaining how these things happen. There's, you know, this place is up for sale and they need someone living in it for insurance purposes, and they heard about me. So this is the biggest, most expensive place I've lived in my whole life, and I'm a sannyas. I've renounced everything. And so if you live as a sannyas, like the vows of a sannyas are very simple. It's always speak the truth, never steal, live with less, brahmachari, and the celibacy vow can be even done by married people. It's about controlling the sexual impulse, right? It's about not sort of letting that part of your life run you, is basically the celibacy vow. And if you live like that in your life, everything becomes so simple, right? You're not protecting your stuff. You're not worried about Oh, and nonviolence. That's the fifth vow, is nonviolence. And so that's where the vegan diet comes in, because as Guruji says, he doesn't have a problem with dairy products if they're from a happy cow, if the cow was allowed to keep its calf with it. And then we just get the extra. So it's about the violence of an action. Don't cause harm to anyone. And I read a book on karma when I was in India, and it shocked me. It said, every mosquito you have killed has the right to reincarnate eventually down the line as a human and kill you. And that's why you get a guru, right? Gurus clear your karma. And Atmakriya Yoga clears your karma, because you will never get out from under it on your own. All those ants that...
Oh my God. The spiders, the ants,
I know.
the flies.
When I saw that, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. That can't be. But that's karma. So unless you get under the protection of an avatar, you will never get out from under it on your own.